Hello and welcome to the Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
I'm typing away and forgot to actually introduce myself. I'm Dave.
Yes, the Sci-Fi Show where we're really slow and we're going to talk to you about things like skepticism. So maybe you shouldn't trust what we're going to say. Be skeptical about everything we say
I'm
tonight.
skeptical about my brain power.
So yes, tonight we are actually going to be discussing skepticism, empiricism, and how that relates to atheists like us and like you, and also to theists and every other form of non-theist as well. It relates to absolutely everyone. So before we start, I do want to say that we've covered off topics like skepticism and empiricism in quite a bit of detail in the past, so we're not going to go into lots of detail tonight. We're going to briefly go over what these topics are and then sort of discuss how they relate to things, especially with Easter that's just gone past. I hope everybody had a good one, whether you celebrated it or not for religious reasons or traditional reasons or just because you love a bit of chocolate. I hope you had an absolutely fantastic one. And there is a hell of a lot of stuff that comes out about Easter around this time of year. So we're going to be broaching that topic as well. But first of all, Dave, would you like to just give us the tweeted version of what these topics actually mean?
Okay. So skepticism, there's loads of different types, as we know. There's like Cartesian skepticism and academic skepticism and Pyrrhonian skepticism. But what most atheists are talking about when they talk about skepticism are just doubting any claim that's given to them, unless they're provided with good enough evidence to believe it. Which brings us on to another thing that we often hear from them, and it's a form of evidentialism. And that kind of goes hand in hand with their skepticism, which is we should proportion our beliefs to the evidence that we're presented with. And empiricism is basically all knowledge comes from the senses. As Aristotle said, it's something like there is nothing in the intellect that doesn't come through the senses first.
Yeah. And that's actually one of the funny things actually that you might hear is when people are talking about empirical evidence, they're not strictly talking about all forms of empirical evidence. They tend to be focusing on scientific evidence. They don't actually appreciate all of empiricism. It's only that
it's physical evidence, testable, repeatable, the general kind of catchphrase that they give. But what they're talking about is physical evidence rather than empiricism.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, empirical evidence can actually relate to, experiences or things you're experiencing through the senses, It doesn't necessarily have to be this testable, repeatable thing. And that's one of the follies that sometimes you hear people say, like, well, your experience of that isn't empirical evidence. Okay. And that's because they don't actually mean empirical evidence. Just like when some people use skepticism, they're literally just talking about doubt, as you said, Dave. Doubt without evidence. And then when they're talking about evidence, they're only talking about scientific evidence, even if they're saying empirical. Yeah, it's very confusing, right? And there are so many different ways these things are used. I mean, language is one of these things that changes and evolves, as we know. But there are contextually correct uses for these things, like you can have for things like evolution and theory in science, whereas you can have the colloquial version. If I was to talk about an evolution of ideas, I'm just talking about, change. I'm not talking about biological evolution. if I was saying, I have a theory, I'm just talking about how I have an idea, but I'm not talking about a scientific theory. And it's the same thing when you're talking about empiricism or empirical evidence, or when you're actually talking about skepticism. There's a little bit more than these colloquial uses that people seem to be bringing out. So that is part of what we're bringing to the table tonight.
Yeah, and it's brought on because, like you said, it's Easter time, and the da 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 da. We're moving into OnlyFans territories.
But look, it's a magic trick. Hey, Luke, I did a you.
But yeah, like I was saying, it's Easter time, and the same thing happens at Halloween and at Christmas, where you have lots of atheists and skeptics posting all these memes like, it's Ishtar, it's oyster, Yoster,
Eoster, Ostara.
Yeah, and they post all these memes that say that it's based on this pagan fertility ritual and it's stolen from the pagans and all this kind of stuff. And yet you have people like Tim O'Neill and lots of others who have outright debunked these claims. And even when presented with that evidence, most skeptics and atheists will turn around and go, well, no, it is what I originally claimed.
Well, here's a funny story for you. The first time I saw the Ishtar meme, I think I was going through a little bit of a pagan phase myself, or at least going back and forth between agnosticism and some form of paganism. And the first time I saw that Ishtar meme, I turned around and said, no, that's false because it's Ostara.
That's a different way around it.
So I argued against it for another false belief. I was arguing one false belief for another. And as you say, it's people like Tim O'Neill who've actually done some serious work on it and looked into the history. And the evidence that they've presented actually did change my mind. The arguments that they made, the things about Ishtar, and the people saying, "Oh, it's pronounced Easter." No, it's not. It's pronounced Ishtar.
It's kind of funny where it's like right in front of their face, the ish, and they'll go, "Yeah, but it's actually pronounced Easter."
Yeah,
it's like no.
But yeah, and it's I suppose the Oster or Ostara that I was brought up with. I suppose I had an Anglican upbringing, but there was this sort of, I guess this rumor must have been in the school or something like that. So when I first saw this Ishtar thing, I knew. I mean, obviously, I'm not talking about knowledge here, but I knew, as in high degree of certainty, that they were wrong because of this other thing. And it wasn't until it probably was Tim O'Neill's blog that I was reading that I was just like, oh. And you look at a few verifiable sources and you're like, yeah, actually, the Eoster thing actually comes from a Protestant who didn't like the festival and wanted to get it out.
Wanted to denigrate it. Yeah. And he wanted to paint the Catholics in a bad light. And
and there's lots of stuff like that. And it's the same thing with, the Ishtar thing. They say, oh, yeah, bunnies and eggs, that was her symbol. And actually, no, it was like the lion and the hawk or the owl or something like that. A lot of false claims are actually brought up to back this up. And when you present this to some of your fellow atheists, they don't even take the time to consider it. They instantly other the information and they say, no, that's coming from a source. Because you're arguing against what people are saying, clearly you must be a theist in disguise and and the information's instantly cut off. And it's kind of an interesting sort of behavior And I can understand that we are anchored to certain bits of knowledge and our beliefs. It is understandable, but I'm not sure I'd say it's completely acceptable especially for a community of people who regard themselves as skeptics. You know, go for it, Dave.
Oh, you carry on. Sorry, I'll go after you finish.
Oh no, I was just going to say, especially ones who claim that evidence will change their mind and then reject evidence that's presented to them without even considering it. I doubt hardly any of them actually take the time to read it.
That's it. I mean, if you think about what's his name, the lion guy, Bitch Spot Blog.
Mm-hmm.
He constantly says things like, we shouldn't go with what makes us feel good. We should go with the evidence. Facts don't care about your fifis. And you get a lot of atheists online who will say stuff like this, like, we should proportion our beliefs to the evidence. We shouldn't go with religious people are bad because they believe things that make them feel good rather than things that are true. And yet they will discard their empiricism, their skepticism, and their evidentialism at the drop of a hat because they prefer these stories that allow them to criticize religion over the actual facts.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus mythicism is another one of them. Even though atheist historians themselves will say, the character Jesus most likely existed. They're not arguing for the biblical Jesus in the mythological sense. They're arguing for some form of apocalyptic preacher. But it's easier for atheists to say that oh, well, he just didn't exist, and therefore your entire religion's false, and haha, you're just stupid. There's no records from, over 2,000 years ago. Haha, you're idiots. And it's the same sort of thing with these festivals, putting them down as pagan. Do you know what? Maybe there is a little bit of symbiosis with some of the other festivals at the time. They happen at similar times. I mean, this does happen with different cultures. Oh well, we have a festival at this time of the year, so let's sort of do another one. Yeah, there will be elements that are shared. I don't think anyone will disagree that there are some shared elements with it, with all different religions. But it's the idea that no, Christmas is entirely pagan. Easter is entirely pagan. Halloween's entirely pagan. And they don't listen to the justifications about things like Shrove Tuesday, and why there's eggs. Well, they're heading into Lent, so they're supposed to give up things like that. So they're using all of the eggs that they can. And so what they did was make loads of pancakes and pastries and things like that. And then what they would actually do is decorate all the eggs, all the empty eggs. So they'd do the thing where they'd pop them out and blow the eggs out and make a festival of it and try and make light of this time when they're, not being quite so indulgent. And, oh, okay, that's a fairly good justification. That actually makes sense. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, eggs and bunnies make sense for spring fertility too. But is that why they were doing it? No.
That's it. And if you think about another thing that they'll say is that we should defer to experts on these things. Don't get your science from a theologian. Theologians aren't experts on such and such. Don't get your history from a scientist. Get your science from a scientist, your history from a historian. They'll argue for going to experts. But then when it's a case of an expert disagreeing with their stance, they will discard that too. It'll be like, well, that's just an argument from authority.
I hate the argument from authority as well. Because it's one of those ones that isn't necessarily a fallacy. Like the argument from authority is generally one of those things that, well, actually, if you've got someone who is an authority on a subject, you can trust them. And perhaps you should have some other justifications around them. You shouldn't say it just because, well, just this one expert says, but you can have a consensus of expert opinions. And then that doesn't become an ad populum, because it's not the same as, well, you know, millions of people believe in Jesus, so that he must be God, sort of thing. It's not that sort of justification. It's like, well, all the experts in history agree that this is, or, you know, and so yeah, I don't know. It's
Yeah, and it's just something that I really think atheists can kind of work on. And like you brought up before, whenever Tim O'Neill tries to argue these cases, he'll get called an undercover theist, a Christian in disguise, he's pretending to be an atheist, all that kind of stuff. And yet the empirical data is there to show that Tim O'Neill is an atheist. And one of the things that kind of made me want to bring this up as well is, you know, Inspiring Philosophy.
Mhm.
Sorry. He posted a video over the weekend or just at the beginning of the weekend. And it was basically a historian being interviewed. And the title was What New Atheists Get Wrong About History. And that's the title of this book he's released. And in it, he's discussing this kind of thing, and he's discussing the same kind of stuff that Tim O'Neill does. And the video immediately got jumped on and dismissed because it was targeting atheists. It's like, well, this is just being tribal. Why isn't he criticizing what everybody gets wrong about history? Why just atheists? And saying, you know, if one tribe's going to attack the other tribe, they should expect pushback from that tribe. But the actual historian that was giving the interview was a non-believer. Yeah. So it wasn't one tribe attacking another, but there seems to be this instance where if anybody criticizes how atheists think or how atheists work or the popular memes, that kind of stuff, other atheists will jump in and do their best to form this line to
Mhm.
protect those bad thinkers
Mhm.
and dismiss the arguments. And I really think that's something that a lot of atheists and skeptics kind of need to work on. Don't be so knee-jerk reaction. Listen to what's being said. And even if it is the other tribe, just giving those knee-jerk reactions doesn't mean that what they're saying doesn't have some credibility and some merit.
No, I completely agree with you there. I think that we can actually learn a lot from. If you want to refer to them as opposition, you can, but I think we shouldn't even do that. I think we should just regard them as other people that think slightly differently. And maybe you'll find from discussing with them that you actually have a lot more similarities than you do differences. And perhaps you can learn a little bit about how mistaken you are about some of their beliefs. I mean, there's, for Christianity alone, there's so many different takes on it. You know, that there really are. From the literalist all the way to someone who's completely liberal. I mean, you think about someone like Digital Gnosis and his take on Christianity, or Craig Reed, and then you compare them to, I don't know, Ken Ham.
Yeah. Or Banana Man.
Yeah. Yeah. So you should have these discussions and try and listen with an open mind and trying to just assume that there's something going on, because we atheists do a lot of bad stuff too. But I mean, I'd say it. Capturing Christianity called out his side the other day. So he did an interview with Ben Watkins. And a lot of the Christians were really nasty in all of the comments and everything like that. So, I mean, that's still on Patreon. So I haven't actually watched the interview yet. But on Facebook, all the comments underneath it were just like loads of Christians being really, really, really nasty and saying really negative things about atheists. And it was quite funny because they were doing the things that they accused atheists of doing in those comments. But atheists do the same too. We're both like equally tribal in general, especially on the internet. We both get really nasty about each other rather than taking that charitable reading on each other. There is a few comments in the chat. So John from America says, I don't see how a bunny is related to Jesus' resurrection. So I'm going to read you a passage from Tim O'Neill's blog on this. He says, the Easter Bunny is a modern commercial take on the Northern European association of hares, not rabbits, with Easter. Again, there's no evidence of any pagan origin here. Hares are generally shy and solitary animals, but in early spring they become more social as part of their mating behaviour. So around March in most of Northern Europe, hares can be seen in fields boxing, with males competing for mates and females, occasionally rebuffing males physically. The sight of groups of hares in fields would have been a sign of the onset of spring and that Easter was around the corner for rural people without calendars. Thus, the German and Dutch tradition of the Easter hare, which came to the US and became the Easter bunny and then spread to the rest of the world as a way of selling more confectionery. So again, no paganism. I mean, honestly, it's worth checking out his blog. There's a link in the comments to a video that he's done of this as well, most recently. But I am gonna chuck a link to the blog in the chat for everyone if they want to read the article from Tim O'Neill. Great guy. We need to have him back on the stream at some point soon. It's just never been the right time.
Time difference is hard as well.
Yeah. I mean, it is around the world. You know, what was it? I did a Saturday evening at one point, and it was 5 a.m. for him, and yeah, very, very, very difficult. Just catching up with on the chat. Hi, just to say hello to everybody who's popped in. Nice to have you here. Great to see so many of you in the chat already. If you do have any questions or comments, please let me know. Good evening, Ansrida. Yeah, great to see you there. And wow, there's loads of you coming through to the chat now. Cool. All right, so I'm caught up on the chat. So back to what we were just saying. Yeah, we do need to be a little bit more charitable in our readings and taking the time to understand one another. And I know that can be hard in online conversations, especially in places like Twitter. I find everybody there is prone for a fight. And I get caught up in it myself, especially with certain people. There are certain people who I've got to a point where I can't really be bothered to give them much more than a sarky response unless they do something that triggers me. And I know that's not necessarily a great behavior, and it's not, but it can be difficult. And to be honest, most of them are our side. If we were going through this whole tribal thing, they're demonstrating behaviors that I don't want to see from our side, and I think that's why it bothers me more. If I was to see a theist acting this way, it's easier to go, look how terrible he is making all the other theists look, you know. Whereas when it's someone like when it's an atheist doing it, it is hard for us to go, oh crap, we're grouped in with them.
I think as well, there's a couple of things that I would say on this as well, is that if you think about it in terms of tribalism, our side, their side, all that, I think it's important to do kind of critiques from the internal of that tribe. Because like with the response to that video from Inspiring Philosophy, people jumped on and goes, well, if the other tribe is going to criticize us, they should expect pushback. So it's immediately dismissed when it comes from the other side. And there's loads of reasons given for why we shouldn't have to listen to them. Well, it's just tribalism. It's just putting down the other side, you know. But what's being said is important. So when it comes from the actual inside, of the tribe, it's slightly harder to do. Yes, they do it by saying, well, undercover theist. I mean, look at Bitchspot Blog and Ben Watkins, and
Yeah, that was
look
ridiculous.
at how Tim O'Neill gets treated. Look at
Look
how
how
we
we
get
get
treated.
treated.
Yeah. But they all kind of fall apart because you can turn around and say, well, you know, I lack belief in God, which is your definition. So therefore, I come under atheist according to your definition. Listen to me and look at your behavior. It's easier to do with that kind of thing. Um, and another thing that kind of separates it is the Christians aren't the ones saying that they hold to evidentialism, that we should that they should proportion beliefs according to the evidence. It's our side. It's the skeptics and it's the atheists. And they're the ones also saying we should only accept empirical data. Evidence will change our mind. So really, the critiques kind of work better against the people making those claims because they're making these claims and acting as if it makes them superior. Your hair's growing through your hat.
It's one
Don't
of my
pull it out. You
wives.
haven't got much left. Yeah. So it's easier to point out that they're being hypocritical about this, and a lot of them will also argue stuff like, if I'm not being a good skeptic or if I'm wrong, I want it to be pointed out because I want to have as many true beliefs as possible. So there is a connection there to actually have these conversations. Unfortunately, most don't want to have these conversations because, like I said earlier, they would rather go with what makes them feel good about criticizing. And, any hole that allows them to get in and criticize religion, they'll stick their head through.
Yeah. And it comes back to the tribalism of the own side as well, because they see how some people are treated who do step out, and they've got a group of people who are all saying the same thing and backing each other up. And unfortunately, without realizing it, perhaps they are making sort of ad populum reasons to maintain this false belief. Well, all the other atheists say this. Okay. A lot of Christians say X. A lot of Muslims say Y. A lot of Hindus say Z. So,
well, that's another one that can be jumped on here, and a criticism that can be made is that a lot of atheists and skeptics will argue something like, no matter how much you believe something or how many people believe something, it doesn't make it true. Well, that's the same with stuff like this, no matter how many times you spread those terrible memes about Ishtar and the oyster, they're not going to be true.
No, but unfortunately that never really lands, and I think that's the frustrating thing. It's the same thing when you're talking about how there's more than one definition of atheism. With some people, they've got so much tied up into it that, that they are desperate for there to be only one, that they will spread these bad comments and say, look, this other atheist says it. They work in an atheist organization. They know what they're talking about. You should let us atheists define ourselves. I'm an atheist. Here's a number of other atheists that are saying that it's blasphemous. I'm not telling you can't use your preferred definition. And I'm just saying there are other ones, and I personally prefer to use this one for myself.
Yeah, it's an example I was going to bring up as well of atheists dropping their evidentialism and their empiricism because they want to go with something that makes them feel good, or makes them feel like they know something. They're willing to drop it in the case of trying to win an argument. Another one, which from Luke, you'll appreciate this one, is religion is a delusion. You can point to the actual psychological definition of delusion and show that, religion doesn't fall under it, and they'll dismiss it and say, well, maybe in the future. Psychologists just accept it because it's a popular belief, so therefore they don't class it as a delusion. There's lots of examples where atheists and skeptics will just throw away this evidentialism and this empiricism because it doesn't fit their view of what should be said.
Most definitely, and they won't even take into account that, okay, you might think that these people have been deluded. It's a bad word to use because of its link to delusional. But when you're talking about delusional, they're talking. Well, I mean, Luke is better at explaining it to me, but a psychological term that describes a mental state of how someone's completely out of touch with reality, and just believing in gods isn't the same thing as someone who suffers delusions. I mean, as Luke has said on stream a number of times, and I'm sorry if I, misquote this, paraphrase and bastardize everything you say, Luke, but usually it's some form of power. People will believe that they're Jesus or they're kings or they never really believe that they're just a poor coal miner or anything like that. It's generally a delusion of grandeur. I'm sure there are other types of delusions that people do have, and there might be delusions people suffer because of other psychological conditions, but it's completely different from a general person who believes in a god. And a lot of the atheists who say these things used to be religious themselves. And you have to wonder, do you believe that you used to be mentally ill and just got better by dropping a belief that there's a God? I mean, imagine if all mental illness was actually just that easy to just, oh yeah, I'm better now. It's something quite considerably different to that. Daniel Kelly says, religion is a messy word, but it seems like a religious approach to atheism, entrenched in overconfidence and viewing it as a moral failure when others don't hold to the same list of descriptive propositions. Yes. I have nothing to add to that, Daniel, other than just agree with you. Luke says, I've had several arguments with other atheists where they made claims that I have asked for scientific papers and they share one that they only read the abstract to, which then disproves their point in the actual text. You've shared a few of those with me in the past, Luke. So, hang on, you go on to talk about an example. One example was where someone said religious beliefs were mental illnesses and shared an article which said that nowhere. Yes, I remember that one. Wasn't that that Roman guy? I can't remember off the top of my head.
Roman Piso.
Yes, but I don't know if it was him or it probably was. He shared a lot of things and had a lot of conspiracy theories. My favourite one of his was in the 80s, the churches bought up all the dictionaries to change the definition of atheism. Sorry. Oh, Dave, you say the argument you had the other night with the guy with the single Psychology Today article was another example. What was that one, Dave?
Okay, so I got into this argument with this guy the other night who was attacking Bryant, Lord Bryant. And he was discussing about belief in God, and Lord Bryant said, well, I'm not a Christian, because he was saying, you believe in talking snakes and talking donkeys and, that kind of stuff. And
Yeah,
Lord
I mean,
Bryant said, well,
deists
I'm
don't
not a
believe any of
Christian.
that stuff at all.
Yeah, that's it. He said, I'm not a Christian, I'm a deist. And this guy went, well, I wouldn't brag about that because psychiatrists classify you as clinically insane. And I said,
I saw
what
the conversation.
Psychiatrists? Yeah. And he goes, well, all of them. I said, okay, name one. Cite a source. Show me a quote. And he shared a Psychology Today article which had the legal definition of insane. And part of it said believing in things that aren't true. And he said, well, that shows that all psychiatrists believe He was essentially saying all religious people, not just theists. But he said this one line taken out of this definition shows that all psychiatrists believe that all believers in God are clinically insane.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's taking the tiniest bit out of context and trying to make it say something it doesn't.
Yeah, and he couldn't provide quotes, couldn't provide sources, couldn't provide names. And I said, well, provide some. He goes, well, I don't have to. I've given you that article from Psychology Today. And he actually pulled the kind of argument from authority and said, this article proves it's a legitimate source. Psychology Today is a well-respected thing. So this proves that all psychiatrists, and no matter how much I argued, he couldn't give. He just said, all I need is that one line from that one article to prove it. I said, well, if psychiatrists believe this, there would be more. There would be sources, there would be arguments, there would be papers and research from psychologists. And he went, well, there is none, but all I need is this article to prove it. And
Right.
I said to him, according to your own definition, you're clinically insane because you're believing a falsehood. You're believing a fantasy that all psychiatrists classify believers in God as clinically insane. He goes, no, I'm not clinically insane. I'm not believing a fantasy. That article proves
But that's
that,
the fantasy.
but that's the fantasy, yeah. So according to his own definition, he was clinically insane, as he was calling other people.
Brilliant.
And the argument went on for a while, yeah.
As they tend to on Twitter, and they go nowhere, and in the end you're just like, oh, fuck it.
Yeah, but I was bored and couldn't sleep, so,
Yeah.
And I think people like that need to be pushed back on.
Yeah, I agree with you. To be honest, I think that tends to be my time on Twitter. I'm either bored and can't sleep, or I'm at work and I'm waiting for queries to run. And most of the time I try to keep it to shit posting and memes, but occasionally it's one of those conversations. And they tend to go on for days.
Yeah, I gave up on it once I went to bed, and the next day it was
the healthy thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I try not to get into those because I have trouble letting go once I'm involved in one of those conversations.
Yeah, I don't have that problem. I've got plenty to do outside of Twitter, so...
So do I. That's the problem. It takes me away from it.
Well, then sort it out.
Yeah, that's why I try not to get in them in the first place. I have to work around my personality flaws because I can't fix them.
See, I just have no personality flaws.
It's true. You are flawless.
As you can tell by the smoothness of my...
Daniel also says, to be fair, I think we all wager our decisions on what we want as well as what we think is true. If we are explicit about what draws us to a position, I don't think that's a waste of time. No, I understand that. I think that there is a part of our investigation that is about our desire. And I think part of our desire, I mean, this is part of the problem though, Daniel. People say that they have this desire to hold as many true beliefs as possible. So if there is a conflicting belief that they want this because it's an easy attack on Christians, but they want to hold as many true beliefs as possible, there could be a conflict there, and they have to be aware that there's a conflict, and they have to decide what they want more. And if they actually want the easy wins, then they don't actually want as many true beliefs as possible, and they have to be honest with themselves rather than just aesthetically saying these things about being a skeptic and wanting the true beliefs and so on and so forth.
I mean, I'm probably simplifying it way too much when I say that they're only doing it because they desire it to be true, and they want this avenue to attack Christianity, so therefore they cast off all this other stuff and they refuse to accept new evidence.
I think there's a part of it that's not necessarily even on a conscious level.
Yeah, that's it. There's sort of anchoring bias, group bias, and as we learned from the rationality debates, a lot of people, when they're doing those tests, even when pointed out the right answer, they'll still cling to their old answer, even when shown, how to work it out, why it's wrong. They'll cling to that previous answer because we have this bias within us. It's just a psychological bias.
No, that's true. I mean, I'm resistant to new information the first time I hear it. Doesn't sound right because you've been programmed to hear the same thing over and over. And
That's it. And they're involved in these little, I know they say there's no atheist community, but if you consider the little communities that they exist within, all these answers are echoed around all the time. And anybody that jumps in is just shot down and yelled at and argued away. So as far as they're concerned, that these answers are correct and unquestionable. And there's not wanting to be expelled from the group could be driving some of these decisions. There's the bias against religion, probably thoughts like, well, I'm a skeptic and I don't accept information without good evidence, so therefore I must have good evidence for this belief, even though if they stop to think about it and
they
we're a
don't.
little bit skeptical, yeah, that's it. This is why I think Cartesian skepticism could be an important thing for atheists and skeptics in the community to actually think about and learn and sort of study, because Cartesian skepticism kind of gets at the heart of wiping away all these false beliefs. Sure, there's problems with Cartesian skepticism and foundationalism, but the actual process of examining our beliefs should be important for skeptics.
Definitely. I mean, even if they don't go to the levels of, fully employing Cartesian skepticism, they could at least turn what they have, outwardly to things that they hear inward and doubt their own information to a degree and reassess. And sure, this new information, you doubt it because you don't think it's verified by anything else. Okay, cool. Have a think about what's weighing against that in your own head, and actually think about why you believe all these things. There are so many times when I recognize a belief in myself which is because of something I was told as a kid, and I reel myself back in and go, I have never verified this in my life. I don't even know if it's true. This is something I learned in the 80s. It's probably wrong. And I completely backtrack over the conversation. And I think that is a more recently learned skill in my life. I think so much of my life I've been so certain in my knowledge from things I've learned when I was younger. And I think it's natural to do it. And it takes a lot of time and energy to actually recognize these biases and things within yourself and reassess the information. And I don't blame people not doing it, especially for mundane things. But for these conversations that you're getting heavily involved with, and someone says something that you're unsure of, you haven't heard before, you haven't heard from someone on their side, those are the ones that you need to actually spend the time doing this with. Because if these conversations about religion, about God, about different morals and morality and evolution and all of that sort of stuff are all important to you, then actually take some time and don't just listen to the people who are agreeing with you. Don't think about the low-hanging fruits, don't necessarily think about the Ken Hams of the conversation. But if you can find someone, say you're an atheist, find an atheist that disagrees with you and have a conversation with them. You may not agree with them, you may not have your mind changed at all, but you might learn a little bit more about other positions on this particular topic. And I think that is the important thing, learning that something new that could plant a seed that could maybe lead you to other thoughts or make you question other things. And,
Well, it's interesting you brought up the thing about believing stuff that, from a child, and once you stopped and thought about it, you thought, well, my only grounding for this is somebody told me this a long time ago, and I've worked on this thing under the assumption that it's true and it's worked. So I've had no reason to doubt it. You'll get a lot of atheists who will argue testimony is not a source of knowledge without actually understanding that most of what we actually know comes from testimony. So a lot of our beliefs do come in like that. They're just beliefs that we've picked up. Even this idea that seems to be popular now, I don't hold any beliefs.
Oh, God, that's such a ridiculous one.
That's one that's been picked up. They've heard it from somebody else, and it's like, oh, religious people have beliefs. I don't want to be like a religious person. Therefore, I don't hold beliefs. And there is Pyrrhonian skepticism, which is to just remain agnostic on everything, because we might not be able to have justifications for knowledge at all. So I think if skeptics and atheists want to start actually being good skeptics, they should stop and think about that statement where they say testimony can't be trusted, and stop and think about how much information they've actually got from testimony. And not only just from testimony, but from testimony. What we mean by testimony here is information passed on without us actually doing the work. We've just learned it from somebody who said something.
Think about a textbook.
Yeah, when you read Why Evolution is True, you haven't done any of those experiments. You're getting it from the testimony of the writer who has done these experiments. So stop and think about all this stuff that you've picked up from other atheists and start applying that, well, testimony can't be trusted. What am I missing here? What should I be doubting? What should I be looking at, discarding? What other evidence, as they like to say, do I have to hold this belief? It just shows that there's all these popular catchphrases from skeptics and atheists that aren't ever actually applied to their own thinking.
No, I agree. I think that's a big part of the frustration, really. And I don't really know how to reach a lot of the online atheist non-community because trying to hold these conversations often ends up with being othered and not listened to. I mean, occasionally you do have a good conversation with someone, even if they don't agree with you. They might realize a couple of things that they didn't before. Sometimes you can have a conversation with someone about, say, moral realism. They may not agree with it, but they suddenly understand what's actually meant by it, rather than what they thought before and why the arguments that they were making against it were bad. And they might have better arguments in the future for why they don't like moral realism, and that's fine, but they've at least learned what moral realism is. But in general, the conversation just goes down this same sort of circle of descriptive statements about how it seems to be working, and not actually acknowledging how it's talked about within philosophy. But yeah, Dan says, I like the term non-theism. I'd agree with you. I think it's a great umbrella term for all the different types of people that don't hold a belief in God. So I definitely agree with you. I know that, a lot of people have broadened the term atheism to be synonymous with non-theism. I don't personally like that, but the way language works, it is a valid use, even if I do think it's a little bit silly. But there you go. Well, so what's this? Kimo's saying, a conception of a disordered mind, belief in which is adhered to against all evidence, which cannot be accounted for by any reasonable hypothesis, from Old Black's Law Dictionary. So that's going back into the definition of insane or insane delusion. And yes, a belief in which is adhered to against all evidence. And I think that is a big part of it. With just a belief in gods, I don't think is necessarily the sort of evidence that they're looking for either way. So again, that can't fit that paradigm. Question, Dave, from Jesse saying, I've been recently wondering, does everyone have a brute fact at the core of their understanding? The naturalist has that of the observable universe, the theists have it of God, and so on.
I would say yes.
Yeah.
We start with some brute facts and then go about justifying them. But I'm not as versed on this as I could be, so I don't really know enough to be able to say yes, it is the case.
Yeah. I suppose there's always something that you accept as true or take for granted, isn't there?
Axioms, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. Lone Wolf, what did you miss? Nothing, don't worry. You know it all already, don't worry. Daniel says, even when we know about biases, they're still massively difficult to spot in ourselves. Peer review, whether formal or just with friends, and challenging our ideas is essential. Yes, completely agree with you. It can be really hard to overcome your biases, and the peer review that you need to go through is by having people who are actually going to tell you when you're wrong, though, rather than having a group of people who are always going to tell you that you're right. You need to find a circle of people who will challenge you.
That's why we're here.
Yes. I think it can be hard to find that, though, because you are drawn to groups all the time where you are of similar dispositions. And especially with a lot of the content creators, be it on Twitter or bloggers or YouTube or whatever, they start getting followers that tend to agree with everything that they're saying and back them up. And the only people that go against them tend to be, again, this other side. And this is where some of this animosity comes from. And when you say something that the other side might say to your in-group, they're not used to being challenged. I mean, look at all the drama that we had with that Liz, like just because a couple of times we challenged a few of the really bad tweets, and we won't go into that. I mean, there was a lot of misunderstanding going on, but that's just one example of how this stuff can sometimes go, like, completely unnecessarily. So I don't know, again, how to avoid this and how to ensure you're always with people who are going to challenge you. You have to have.
I think that's kind of impossible at a grander scale to have everybody doing that. But do you remember Philip mentioned something that Stephen Law did? He created a secondary account, which he then used to follow all the people that he wouldn't normally follow, who gave all the takes that he normally disagrees with, and could read the conversations that they have without kind of interfering in them, so that he could actually just read the justifications and get to know their understanding. I think an approach like that is really good.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to do it, especially if you're not getting too involved, like with the conversation. I think I'd find that really troubling to do. I think I'd have a hard time following so many of the accounts that I've got a bad taste in my mouth for. I find it bad enough sometimes when I see a retweet of, oh, check out what this twat said, and it's something completely gross. And I'm just like, don't respond. It's not going to go anywhere. And I, if I followed all of these people, I'd spend day after day in argument with them, every single one of them. I'm not strong enough.
I mean, I suppose that's one way. I mean, maybe not people you're diametrically opposed to and ideologically opposed to, but people you just kind of disagree with, like say other atheists with us, or say us with other atheists. Instead of listening to what they say in order to say, no, you're getting that wrong, listen to it and then start thinking about their argument, steel man the argument, and then start thinking about whether or not it's good.
Mm.
Whereas a lot of, like I said in the beginning, a lot of atheists have and skeptics have these knee jerk reactions. You're saying something wrong. Somebody's wrong on the internet.
I've actually included that meme in the most recent article I've been working on.
Nice one. But yeah, it's a lot. Don't listen to understand the argument. A lot just listen to it so that they can correct the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's necessarily good skepticism, because yes, you're being skeptical of the other person, but you're also forgetting to be skeptical of what you know.
It is, yeah. I try and do that more on when I've got time on YouTube and with articles and things like that, because I find that there's less arrogance around it a lot of the time. I find some tweets, the way they're worded, they're so condescending and patronizing to someone else of a different position that I get sort of involved in that side of it. I try and watch, especially around topics that interest me, like about morality. I try and watch videos of people who do take a different position to me, like Kane B's someone, for example, and some interesting stuff comes out there that makes me go, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Cease to Know and J Mike of Axioms on Trial. There's a lot I disagree with them about, but they're thoughtful in the way that they're putting their stuff together. They've actually thought about their positions. So it's interesting to hear them actually explain it and for me to think about their justifications and their axioms and, all that kind of stuff. There are good channels out there that I disagree with, but I'm still willing to listen to. And there's also channels that say a lot of bad stuff that I just disagree with. And I can't help but to sit there going, what are you even talking about? You're wrong. Why are you saying, I think it's part of human nature to be like that. And it's something we should try to overcome. But it's hard.
Yeah, that's fair. On the channels front, I think there's also sometimes I'll watch a debate or something like that, or listen to, and the person I agree with just loses. They put their points forward terribly, or they do it in such a bad way that even though I agree with their conclusions, they've lost me on everything that was said, and the other person's been far more eloquent, patient, charitable with the other person's reading, and you're actually, and I think that is a big part of it as well. At least what I find an attractive quality in listening to someone, like you mentioned with the axioms on trial, it's the way they put their points across that enables you to listen to them even though you don't necessarily agree with them. Cafe says, personal experience is the worst evidence there is. What would convince me, you say? I don't know, but I'll know it when I've personally experienced it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what he's getting at there. But, yeah. Sextus viewed Pyrrhonism as a way of life, not just a philosophical stance. The method was finding... equivalence. Is that a misspell, or is that how it's actually said? And the goal with ataraxia. basically tranquility. I remember reading about that a little while ago. All I remember is that word that I can't pronounce. Lone Wolf says, "You're not British, Dave. You are Canadian. So stop stealing other nationalities." I don't know. You're multinational, aren't you, Dave?
Welsh and English.
Yeah.
Who lived in Canada. I mean, I could go get my birth certificate, what with the whole empiricism thing and evidentialism.
Yeah, he just sounds like he's from that part of the world.
I'm just well-traveled, fuckers.
Sorry, I'm just trying to catch up with the chat. I do apologise, folks, for being so far behind it. I'm getting terrible at this, aren't I?
It's because, what I have to say is interesting. So.
Mandrake just hypnotically. These are not the evidences you're looking for. Joe, there's less arrogance. Right, okay. Luke. We all need to take time to sit down and discuss one of the most important events happening in the world right now, the Depp Heard trial. Now, where would you put your skepticism on that? I put mine at, I don't really care.
Yeah, I'm kind of apathetic to it all because, I just don't care.
Yeah.
I like Johnny Depp in films.
I do care if people are being wrongly accused. I don't think it should happen to anyone. It sounds like they've both been nightmares to each other, and it's really none of my business just because they're famous. I wouldn't care if they weren't famous, and I don't care if they are famous. As you say, I like Johnny Depp in films. I think he's done nearly all of his films have been great. Absolutely fantastic. I liked Amber Heard in Drive Angry. That's about it.
I haven't seen it. The only thing I remember really seeing her in was Aquaman.
Oh, she was awful in that.
Yeah. So,
But there you go. Basically, apathy from both of us there, Lone Wolf. Kimo's answered. Equivalence means that each claim or position has an equal opposite claim. Interesting. Cool. Awesome. Are we apaheardist or apadeppist? No, just apathetic to the whole thing.
Yeah, domestic violence is terrible. Don't get me wrong. And it needs to be stamped out. And, it's kind of good that it's being heard in court and stuff that's happened has come out. But I just don't care enough about the two individuals involved to follow any kind of court case. I hope justice is served to the wrong parties and the
as in the parties who are in the wrong.
No, the parties who have been wronged.
Yeah.
But there's all cases that go through that nobody ever hears about, and they're not going to get the kind of justice that Johnny Depp or Amber Heard is going to get because they don't have this big name, they don't have all the money, there's no show trial. I'm more concerned for those people than I am for somebody like Johnny Depp and Amber Heard.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. Lone Wolf picked up on it too. I hope justice is served to the wrong parties. You obviously meant the people who'd been wronged, as in they got justice. But yeah. But yeah. And Luke, the wrong parties being Downing Street parties. Yes. Oh God. Yeah, I don't really want to get involved in that either. Get them out, get them out, get them out, get them out. Fuck off. I don't want to get into politics. I hate it. Um, so back onto where we were with briefly covered off skepticism, empiricism, and a lot of examples of you know, these not being applied, and we've also covered off like evidentialism, and the challenges that you can face, whether it's due to a bias or if it's just due to tribalism, or which you could refer to as a kind of bias, I guess, or something else. How can you move forward though and actually break down the walls of people in an effective way?
That's a very good question. Because I sort of had this discussion with Steen, where he said, you know, you can actually phrase things in a way where it moves the conversation forward.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with that is it needs both parties to actually want to move the discussion forward. And in some cases, like both sides are kind of guilty of this. Like the philosophical atheists can be kind of stubborn on it only means believe God does not exist. They don't want to move that conversation forward. They just want their view to be heard. Same with the lack of belief atheists. Um, so that's kind of a tough question. And I think if all the people declaring themselves to be skeptics and empiricists and evidentialists were to stop and actually think about their position and what it means and to start living that, to actually make it, you know, like a demeanor or a habit, maybe those conversations would actually start happening a little better.
Yeah, going back to your earlier point, I've noticed the same sort of thing about conversations not wanting to move forward. I mean, one of the things I try and do in conversations is spend a lot more time asking questions and listening to a person's position, rather than just flat out saying, well, you're wrong. It's, well, why do you think that? You know, what led you to this? What do you mean by this? Can you help me understand this a bit more? I just want to understand your position. I've heard different things in the past. This is new to me. And all these sorts of open statements. And I've noticed what you mean. There are some people who don't even want to play the game. You know, they refuse to answer the questions. They dodge them. They, you know, go from side to side, and they go, "Ha, I'm not falling for your flowchart," or whatever. And it's like,
Yeah, I hate to name names, but if you think about Randolph Richardson, okay.
do I have to?
Well, there was the conversation last week where it was, I agree with this guy who says that there's only one definition of atheism. And he turned around to you and said, oh, yeah, atheism is polysemous or polysemous. He was arguing both sides of the case. And whenever you tried to actually get him, he would come with these long winded justifications that didn't actually answer the question. And there's a lot of that that goes on.
Bloviating.
Yeah, but also just not addressing the question, trying to sound like you have this really nuanced answer, which is actually not a nuanced answer, but a non-answer. And I think one of the other problems is that within the skeptic community, there's this whole debate bro culture. I'm an atheist, debate me. You know that meme?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that that goes on, and that's what they want to do. They just want to debate and argue and prove the other person wrong, and they're willing to step on their own principles and their own actual beliefs in order to win that conversation. And I think toning that down within the atheist and skeptic community would help.
How do you tone that down? Like, unless
You
you can
can't
reach
because it's
some,
part of the culture.
yeah,
Yeah.
you'd need the bigger content creators to sort of point this out and change their outward behaviors online and get people thinking about things differently. I mean, look how many people change their mind just because someone like Aaron Ra says something, you know? Um, look at how many people will say he won a debate when he loses one. You know, I mean, he's great at the creationism stuff and a lot of science stuff, but when he got involved in that conversation with Thought Adventure podcast, um, he was lost. He was absolutely lost. But he still had so many people sort of backing him up, saying, "Oh no, you own them," and so on and so forth. And it was a bit like, we're always going to have this in-group out-group bias, and I think I understand why. And if we're not going to get rid of that, the only thing that we can do really is try and work on these behaviors. And the only way a lot of the behaviors are going to change is if by the people who are highly respected in the community or communities or however you want to see it, the non-community, only if they change the way they behave and encourage others to change the way they behave. If shows like the Atheist Experience stop having these shouting matches on the phone and not listening to people and hanging up the phone and calling them idiots and whatever, and actually start having a dialectic conversation and where it's actually calm and neutral, and let's find some truth, and let me take you here and justify that for me, and why do you think that, and have you considered this, and and help someone lead their own way to a conclusion, rather than these shouting matches that seem to happen ever more. Maybe there'd be a change within the community, because I think there's too little of it at the bottom where we are. I don't think we have the power to influence anyone to have these better conversations, and I think so many people are interested in having bad conversations that I end up having bad conversations with them. I get to a point where I'm just pissed off with the person who I'm trying to have a good conversation with, not wanting to engage that way, and I flip, and I'm influenced in a negative way, and I know I should have more control over myself, and more often than not, I do step away, but I still flip out sometimes, and I end up behaving in ways that I don't want to. And I want it to be the other way around. I want people to be influenced to behave better, not worse.
I think as well, with social media like Twitter and YouTube, there are people that have created personas, and they're selling a product to a particular audience. And going outside of that audience will interfere with their income stream. And and keeping to those sort of arguments will bring in new members of that audience, especially when you consider how it's all balanced out within these little communities. So there's a sort of showmanship there. I mean, it doesn't count for us because nobody will pay to listen to our bollocks. But, you know, um, there are people that have that kind of, like Aaron Rowe. Like we've said many a time, a lot of the reasons that he is so dug into his atheism means only one thing, um, is that he has built a kind of career on that and built a following on that. Um, and to go against it would be to alienate that audience and interfere with his image and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's also a problem when it comes to that. And that's why a lot of skepticism isn't applied by them to their own side.
Drama sells as well at the end of the
Yeah,
day.
yeah, absolutely.
Unfortunately, causing these internet wars, internet dramas, shouting matches, putting people down, not being particularly nice, it draws more people in. I suppose in a lot of respects it's more interesting. It's why, I mean, I hate reality TV, but it's why all these reality TV shows have so much drama in them that seems so false, because they've been encouraged to have all these dramas, because that's actually what people are really watching for. They're watching the car crash, and that's what interests a hell of a lot of people. And I suppose you could even say the same with other shows that you might be interested in. You know, the average person, and myself included, doesn't sit and watch a documentary. They'll, unless it's something that really, really interests them, a particular topic, but they won't sit there and watch documentaries. They'll watch something that has action and drama and lights and sound and and so they're playing to an audience, and they're playing to it right, but it's not the right.
But are they doing right by playing to that audience?
Thank you. That's what I was trying to say.
I had a feeling that's what you were trying to say. But that's it. It's, are they doing the right thing by pandering to that audience and keeping that sort of antagonism and drama and argumentation going? I can understand wanting to protect your image, wanting to protect your profits. You know, these are important things. We all have families to feed, all that kind of stuff. But think about some of the harms that it's causing, and maybe start applying that skepticism and that evidentialism and that empiricism to your own stances and saying, well, look, I made a mistake. A skeptic should admit to making a mistake. So let's move forward from this and start thinking about this.
Yeah, most definitely. Command Cyborg says, yeah, Randolph can be precious like that. So talking about the earlier conversation. Also, his definition of anti-theism that I get how you could come to, but I don't think I've seen anyone else yet. Yeah, so basically, Randolph has rebranded the classical definition of atheism, belief gods don't exist, as anti-theism. You might remember where we done It's a Load of Cack, which was a review of his site, and we actually pointed out that he wasn't even using anti-theism in the way, you know, someone like Hitchens was, and you know what anti-theism meant. And he actually changed a few things on his site after our review, although some of the things he changed on there he actually made worse than before. But yeah, he's so determined to have this singular view of atheism that he's had to rebrand all other different types of atheism as something else. So now apparently believing gods don't exist is anti-theism, but anti is when you're against something, you know, you're opposed to something, not, you know, negating something. So he's just misunderstood. He even gives a load of examples in his blog where he's misinterpreted things, and he's got this meme that he shares out. Now, a lot of people, this definition, it does pick up traction. So there are a lot of people who refer to people who hold the belief gods don't exist as anti-theists now, and it's ridiculous, because that's not what anti-theism is, you know. And I know I'm sort of holding to a particular definition here, but they're misunderstanding the words and how it came about. And yeah, okay, words are polysemous, so it's becoming a valid definition. It's just one that feels incredibly wrong. It's got no basis. At least with the different definitions of atheism, you can understand by the way you construct the word, your understanding of it, both the without belief and believing gods don't exist definitions can be got to, right? Whereas anti-theism, how that can be the belief gods don't exist just doesn't make sense. Anti means against theism. It should be that simple, and then you expand on it further. So that's why I did the article Hitchens on anti-theism, sort of breaking down how he saw, you know, how he said, I'm not even an atheist so much as I'm an anti-theist. In fact, I can get up that quote for you in just a moment. Although I am being really slow with absolutely everything. Hitchens on anti-theism. Oh, excellent. That link's there. So he's got this A-B statement. So, one, he's talking about atheism, then he's talking about anti-theism. He says, I'm not even an atheist so much as an anti-theist. I not only maintain that all religions are are versions of the same untruth, but I hold that the influence of churches and the effect of religious belief is positively harmful. Reviewing the false claims of religion, I do not wish, as some sentimental materialists affect to wish, that they were true. I do not envy believers their faith. I am relieved to think that the whole story is a sinister fairy tale. Life would be miserable if what the faithful affirmed was actually true. There may be people who wish to live their lives under the cradle, to grave divine supervision, a permanent surveillance and monitoring, but I cannot imagine anything more horrible or grotesque. I think that makes it quite clear on what Hitchens means by anti-theists here. And there are people who, when you present them this Hitchens quote, will turn around and go, yeah, but that's not what he meant by that. Just like, this comes back into this whole rejection of evidence that we were talking about. And you can find a number of different quotes. Now, I do think Hitchens largely went for the lack of belief atheism, and sort of the weak strong atheism split, but he himself thought they were all untrue. So it would seem that he was a strong atheist, even if he said, to be an atheist all you need to do is lack of belief. But he was a strong atheist and an anti-theist. So yeah. Wolf says we can get rid of the in-group and out-group bias easily. Hear me out. All we have to do is get rid of the human factor. Once the obsession of individualism is gone, so will the segregation. So you're going for the Borg there? Hello to those of you who've just joined. Twisted, Honestly Atheist, and Azar as well. Great to have you here as well. Oh, look, there you go. Yeah, Command Cyborg has picked up on that one as well. Resistance is futile. Luke says, remember when he said Christians existed in 500 BC? Yes, we do. That's one of the corrections that we were talking about. He outright said that Christians existed in 500 BC, and then he corrected it to an even worse thing. It was absolutely brilliant. I think I've got that as a highlight somewhere as well. Who's Randolph? Randolph Richardson. He's the president of the Canadian Atheists, whose head office is a 7-Eleven PO box or something. Honestly, Atheist says, I think the only way to end this debate is to reject hostility in all forms and avoid prescriptivism if possible. I agree, especially when it comes to identity. I hate the people telling others, this is what you are. Rejecting the hostility, I mean, how can you do that without being hostile as well? And the only thing you can do is just back away with it, go, well, I don't feel like engaging with this conversation. But how do you address the hostility in a non-hostile way that can help someone let go of their own hostility? I think some people are just hostile, and when we're talking about this debate, obviously you're probably talking about the definition of atheism debate, and that hasn't been the focus of tonight. It's just been one that has come up as we've been going through discussing different areas where skepticism, self-reflection, evidentialism, and all that is lacking. The times when some of us atheists just basically drop what we view as our values and go with what makes us feel good or what the in-group is saying because
And it's a pretty common and popular one. So it's a nice, easy example.
Yeah, most definitely. But yes. What are you? Luke says, I'm an anti-thesis. You don't like writing lots of words? You're against writing. Is that what you're saying? But yeah, so hopefully that explains how we got onto that bit. Oh, Dave, you've actually summed that up in the chat. Am I just going to be going over reading everything that I was going to say?
Yeah, but your view on it is good as well.
So, hi Craig, how you doing? He says, what is the skeptic community versus just atheist? Emerson didn't really explain it. Well, I mean, for one, they've spelt it incorrectly, Craig. I mean, we don't go for American spellings around here, you know. We're
We
othering
go
you
for
right
Welsh
now.
ones.
No, so see, this is an interesting one. I mean, it can apply to a broader term. So, if we were talking about the atheist community, most atheist community will identify as skeptics as well. So, you could brand it. There are atheists that will claim that you can't be a skeptic and a theist, and I disagree with that. I think there are some very skeptical theists, but it's generally tying into that typical online skeptic, online atheist, type thing. I assume that was what Emerson was going for as well. Can you clarify any further, Dave? Once you finish your drink, obviously.
Sorry, bad timing on my part, as always. I haven't had a chance to watch Emerson's video yet, unfortunately, so I can't say.
Yeah. But it's that sort of thing. I mean, perhaps he's being more general and including theists that claim they're skeptics too. But I would assume he's talking about non-theists that claim to be skeptics in his video. But as Dave says, we haven't watched it, so. The only appropriate way to deal with any hostility is by playing the song Fucking Hostile by Pantera to anyone being hostile. Yeah, that's one way to do it. Here's the problem. Atheists are spelling skeptic with a C like dirty Brits, and no one likes that. Well, we do, because we're dirty Brits, so fuck you. Oh, brilliant. Yeah, Craig, that was pretty funny. He's joking about how he reported Luke for hate speech after those written imitations of him. They were spot on, though. Did you read them on Twitter?
No, I didn't see them. Sorry.
No, they. I could exactly imagine. I mean, Luke, I don't know how you did it, but you absolutely captured the spirit of Craig in those tweets. It'll hurt like hell if we break the bad news about all of the U vowels we stick to into flavor, color, and parlor. Yeah. Do you know what? Some of them I don't actually like being there, but I'm so used to having it in there. Although I actually did a year of education out in America, and after a year of having them all corrected and then coming back over here, it was really hard to adjust to putting them all in, because obviously you'd get a bit lazy when you start leaving letters out. But
The only one that I had problems with, and I still have problems with, is tire. Spelt with a Y instead of an I.
yeah, there's through as well. They spelt it all THREW, I think. Always, there was something like that. I remember there were a few of them. Maybe it wasn't through. Maybe it was something else. But there were a few words that I couldn't get my head around. Although one that really pissed me off was the way they said it. Herbs. There's a fucking H at the beginning of the word.
Herb, yeah.
Yeah, you're not Jamaican. You can say the H.
Or Cockney.
Yeah. What
Bunch of
herbs, mate?
herbs in it, mate.
Yeah.
Although weirdly, okay, sorry, gonna go off on a tangent now. Have you been watching Moon Knight?
I've only watched the first episode so far, and it was interesting.
Okay, have you heard his British accent?
Yes.
His English accent? It's really good, like really good.
It's very typical, though, of what you think.
Of a southerner.
Yeah, and what they think all the English people sound like.
Yeah, but they're also calling it a Cockney accent.
Yeah, it's not quite. Not quite.
It's not, is it?
No, it's South London.
More West End, South London, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically the average accent, sort of South Croydon up, I guess. I mean, you tended to be a little bit more chav South Croydon ways, but yeah, that going up that way, which is towards the west, yeah.
Yeah, it's the accent that Americans think British people have outside of the Jeffrey from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air accent.
Yes. Do you know what they really need to learn how to do is a Newcastle accent,
the Geordie accent and the Glaswegian.
Yeah, that'd be hilarious. Chuck in a Manc too, and someone from Cornwall,
and a Scouser.
Yeah, Manc Scouser, same difference.
How fucking dare you! How fucking dare you!
You're starting.
You're chewing a fucking brick, mate.
So yeah. Just like, how can you say the H on hour? Hour. Yeah. Okay. That's a bit of a different one though. It's not herbs. No one does say the H on. Does anyone say the H on hour?
Only when being like really cheeky and rude and mocking. It's Hower, Queen.
You say H as in H. I hate it when people say H. Anyway, sorry, we're going really off course here.
Yeah, my fault.
Probably not. But there we go. So, were there any other examples you think of that we can address tonight that are worth doing, or anything else that you think we should really cover off?
Okay, that's kind of a difficult question. None that are kind of springing to mind at the moment, mostly because those are the ones that are most recent and fresh in my mind. But I suppose you could say that to some degree, like you'll get an argument from many, going back to the usage of words, you'll get an argument from many who will say, well, I guess you're the kind of person who thinks that cool only means temperature. Words have multiple meanings, like Luke shared of Randolph. Fun fact, most words are polysemous. You'll get that argument from them, but then when it comes to the word atheism, they tend to go with this, no, it only has one word. So they'll drop their empiricism for that. And I guess I've heard them say it with, I only use theory to mean well-tested thing. Theory doesn't mean guess. But that only applies within science.
Yeah.
So you see a lot of stuff like that as well.
Actually, a good one to address right at the end here would be the burden of proof. Because when people start talking about the burden of proof, they're talking about it from a very legal standpoint, and you're not in a legal battle. Oh, ties into what you've been watching today, Claire. People talk about a legal burden of proof, and actually what people are engaging when they're having these conversations is closer to the philosophical burden of proof, also known as epistemic justification, and these two things are pretty much synonymous. There's no real difference between the two, and maybe changing the language, like saying burden of justification or epistemic justification, can reach more people, but the atheists will keep on going, I have no burden of proof, it's on the theist, blah 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 blah, and they're not using a relevant burden of proof. They're not using a contextually correct burden of proof. It's like when someone uses theory to only mean an idea, so a scientific theory is just a scientific idea, and you go, well, no, that's not what it means in science. And actually, when you're having a conversation online, you're not using the legal burden of proof. It's irrelevant. And even if you were, you're still getting it wrong, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, no, that's a good example. A lot of them will drop any kind of idea that, there are contextually correct things when it means winning an argument. And to be honest, I guess a lot of that can it's another reason why many will drop their empiricism and their evidentialism, because they have a need to win an argument. So they'll just go with whatever comes to their head that allows them to win what's being said, even if it goes against something that they said previously.
Yeah. And double up with, but I'm right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what that was in relation to. Claire, you say, as you should, language is important. I'm sorry. My brain's all over it. So Luke says, burden of proof, courts, but no testimony despite courts. Weird double standards. Yeah, this is true. And when they address it, they'll go, yeah, well, testimony isn't like the most well-respected. Blah, blah, blah. There's problems with testimony. And yes, there are problems with testimony. Loads of problems with testimony. But there are still people who are convicted based on testimony. So testimony can be enough. And again, testimony isn't going to be the same, exactly the same as it is in the courts. Generally, when you're talking about testimony in the courts, you're literally talking about a verbal testimony of someone's anecdotal experience. Whereas
you're talking about an eyewitness account rather than just information being partake. Partake, that's not the right word. Imparted. Through, the words of another person. Also, fun fact, you only know your name because of testimony until you're older.
This is true. And some people don't even know their name right because they're called like a nickname by their parents.
Like they don't bastard when it comes to my parents.
Yeah. I knew someone that was called Toad growing up by their parents, and when they went to to school for the first time, they came home really angry when my name's not Toad. Really angry at their parents. But yeah, this is true. I mean, and as we mentioned, textbooks, what a teacher tells you, what you learn from lessons and all of that, it's all form of testimony. And do you know what? People learn from bloody Facebook groups and YouTubers and all of that. That's bloody testimony. And all these memes, they're a form of testimony, and they're really bad.
The Ishtar and Yoister memes are testimony. Yeah.
Kimo says, judicial burdens differ depending on the matter before the court, beyond reasonable doubt, preponderance of evidence, and even reverse onus. Yeah, can do. Yes, I agree. Lionel says, well, it's not no testimony. Well, not for me, but eyewitness evidence is the worst kind of evidence in courts too. There's this whole thing about preponderance to consider too. Yes, agree. I mean, we said, it is one of the worst kinds of evidence, but at the same time, people are still convicted on it. If you have enough corroborating eyewitness evidence, it still can be quite compelling. There might be certain parts of the story that maybe don't match up, but then people don't remember everything exactly. And you sort of have to go, like they do with history, right? Lots of historians look at all the evidence and they all put together what they think it means, and all of them get together and go, right, these are the bits of truth that we can get out of it, and these are the things that we think might be likely, these are the things that could be the case, these are the things that we'll get rid of. Except it's a lot more recent than that, so not quite as hard as ancient history. Cyborg says, the peculiar thing about words is that they mean something. The same words just don't mean the same thing every time or over time. Yes, there's no inherent meaning to it. Is essentially what you're saying there. They all have a meaning. And the meaning they get is derived from use, and the use is something that is derived through a number of different things, and some of that is from understanding and misunderstanding of things like etymology and logic and all of that, and so yeah, language is very, very confusing. And as much as we said earlier that you should try and avoid prescriptivism, it would be nice if people stuck to contextually correct uses of words. If everybody who said the word atheist meant the exact same thing and it was this nice, concise definition, then it would make sense. And we'd all know what we meant by that. And if people didn't use things like the burden of proof for online conversations at all, they just use things like justification. What's your justification for that? Or not you haven't met your burden of proof. I don't think you fulfilled your epistemic responsibility to have enough to warrant a fulfilled justification upon your position. These are the problems I see with your justification. So with these holes, it seems like you don't hold a very rational position. Suddenly you take that's more what people are talking about when they're talking about burden proof in these conversations, or at least that's what they should be talking about. But they're stuck on this whole legal thing.
Well, here's an interesting one for you. Something like empiricism isn't just a theory of knowledge, but it's also kind of a theory of meaning. Because you can present evidence to somebody, but they have to understand the meaning of what they're seeing and the meaning of the words that are being used in order to actually understand why it's considered knowledge. And that's why words can be kind of important, like in the terms of burden of proof and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's fair. There's a lot of conversation going on about the whole evidence thing in the chat. But that's honestly, Atheist says, I view the self-evidence fact I am not aware of any convincing arguments for God as more expected on atheism and functions as an evidential chip, causing atheism to be my proper default.
See, I actually kind of like the way he's worded that. My default. And I'll agree with that. That's why atheism is my default, because I see these arguments that, along with my skepticism, my empiricism, all that kind of stuff, that's why I default to it. But it's when somebody says atheism is the default or skepticism is the default that you start to have problems with the argument.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really want to get into the whole conversation about atheism as the default position. I think it, as you mentioned, like when you're saying my default, it's basically saying that's my starting point in these conversations, and I need someone to give me a reason to step out of that and consider it, which is fine. Like give me a reason to think that my position is wrong, or that your position has any merit to it.
Yeah, and it's a good approach to any kind of conversation, to be honest.
It sort of is akin to what Flew was going with his negative atheism, isn't it? You know.
It is. Start from the position that you know nothing about what they're going to present, and you then assess the evidence as it's given to you. I mean, Flew says you start from a kind of blank page, but I don't think that's actually possible because we all have these meanings and ideas in our head, and they're all interlinked. Um, so I think, I mean, it's basically agnosticism, isn't it?
Hmm.
But I think that's a good starting point. But the problem is a lot of people say they're starting from that point, but they're actually starting from this point that there can be no good evidence. So anything that's given to them, they're coming out with a bias rather than honestly assessing the evidence. I mean, you think about how many people say there can be no evidence for God,
Yeah.
but also that they just lack belief and that they don't think there is no God.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of confusing statements, aren't there? Really. Or confused statements, should I say, rather than confusing statements.
And
Yeah.
again, I think that's why skepticism or understanding skepticism for those claiming to be skeptics, especially something like Cartesian skepticism, is kind of important to learn because a lot of people just have this vague notion of what it means to be a skeptic. Skeptic is just not believing in God, say.
Mm.
Um, so I think skeptics really need to step outside and start doubting themselves.
Yeah. Oh, well, you sure about that, Dave?
I'm never sure of anything because I'm always just knackered.
Kimo says the lack of belief thing is fine, but it's vapid and vacuous. I think it definitely can be, and I think a lot of the conversations online, it definitely is. I don't mind someone that lacks belief in God wanting to be known as an atheist. It's not really a problem as long as I'm aware that that's what they mean by it. I think some of the reasons people take that position are a little bit dishonest. And I don't think that's always the case either. I think sometimes it can be and sometimes it's not. I think there are people who approach the position really genuinely and are looking for answers, and they go, well, I don't believe in gods. And someone goes, well, that means you're an atheist. And they go, oh, okay, then. And that's why they're there. And then they hear all these bad memes. That means you don't have any burden of proof. you know, that means you have to think this about morality and so on and so forth. And all of that comes out of it. So I don't think necessarily the lack of belief thing is what causes that. It's necessarily vacuous, but yeah. I still really dislike it. I see a lot of problems with that definition, and I would rather, the split of different types of non-theists and very specific positions that allow us to accurately infer what someone does and does not believe about the proposition God exists. But not everybody sees things the way I do, and I guess it would be really boring if they did. I just lack belief in good evidence. Yeah, I mean, there can be an argument to say that there's no such thing as good evidence. That's just largely accepted. I don't know how good that argument would be in itself, but is that a good argument? Lone Wolf says, I just lack belief in a lack of belief. That is one of the points about the whole special pleading thing. If an atheist can be defined on the whole lack of belief in God's existing, can a theist be defined by a lack of belief in God's not existing? And if so, what happens to someone that lacks belief both ways? Are they both a theist and an atheist? It's why another reason why you've got some of this confusion. Then you might say, well, no, that only applies to this side and not that side. And so you're either stuck with a contradiction or special pleading. But anyway, Honestly Atheist then says, the next step is to consider if it is also the proper default for other people who are not aware of convincing arguments for gods. I'm not getting into that. If you really want to know, I've got an article called The Problem with Atheism as the Default Position. And I'll post a link in the chat for you. And it goes in. It does discuss the awful argument from Aaron Ra at the beginning about the whole rocks thing, and then it goes into modifications to the definition and all of that. And yeah, you might enjoy it, you might not. There are some things in there which are absurdisms to make the point of how it's a comparison, and if you go, well, that's just absurd. Yeah, that's the point it's trying to make. It's absurd. Sorry. Cafe, I lack the theological understanding that would inform me what would constitute direct evidence for God within a theological context. Yeah, I think depends how good you want the evidence to be. If you're talking about scientific evidence, I don't think you'll ever really get that, will you? Not in our lifetimes. But yeah. Why is Joe taking a comment of mine seriously? I don't even remember what I've said, to be honest, Dave. So, and am I not drunk enough? No, I've only had one drink tonight. So there you go. It was my last one. I've just finished my bottle of bourbon, and we're trying to save the pennies because we spent too much on our credit cards. Anyway, cool. So I think tonight we've gone over the basics of what skepticism and empiricism are. We've given a number of examples about and evidentialism as well. We've given a number of examples of how some of us atheists have hung up our skepticism and empiricism and evidentialism for things that might make us feel good or make us fit in with the group. I've even given examples where I've done it in the past myself. I don't think any of us here, apart from Dave, would claim to be flawless. But I think it's something we all need to be working on, and I think it's great that we can all challenge each other. And yeah, I think there's a lot that we can work on, and it would be nice to find some way to help combat the aggressiveness within the atheist community. Because as I mentioned earlier, when enough comes at me, it turns me that way myself, and I don't like getting that way. I don't enjoy those conversations, and I don't like being that way externally for other people to see as well. It's not my default. I think from the number of conversations you might have seen us have around here, even when we've had people disagreeing with us or having a different position to us, as long as they've been the right kind of conversation, it's fine. And I think that's what we try and need to take into the social media realm. And I don't know, especially in places like Twitter, where you've only got these little bullet points, so everything seems like you're being snappy with someone. You can really get rid of all of that hostility. I mean, maybe the spaces is something to use on there, but I don't know about you. I can't always jump into a verbal conversation. The only time I really have to do it is these streams. The rest of the time it's text. I wish Twitter would evolve their platform to allowing, a decent comment length. But then would that just lead people into leaving pages and pages of information? And I don't know. There's so many different ways to think about it. Honestly, Atheist says, I think some honest interlocutors use the lack language as an attempt to be epistemically humble. They don't want to claim some kind of omniscient knowledge about the fact that may be undetermined. I think you could be right there for some people, although a lot of those people also say that they're agnostic atheists. They don't know and they lack belief. And then they don't understand that when they're saying they lack belief, they're already saying that they lack knowledge, because knowledge is a subset of belief. So again, the whole agnostic atheist label is an attempt at being epistemically humble. But then when you try and explain to them these things about knowledge, you end up back in this whole circle of, no, that's not it. And the other, I actually, an example on this one the other day, I was talking to someone said, no, knowledge isn't a subset of beliefs. Knowledge is just facts.
Yeah, knowledge is the collection of facts.
Yeah.
Belief has nothing to do with it. Yeah.
And I was
to some extent, he's kind of correct. We do consider
it's a body of
facts
knowledge
to be a body of knowledge, yeah.
But it's not holding knowledge, which is how I actually turn the conversation around. So, okay, so say I just had a load of facts in my head, but I couldn't really justify what they meant and didn't really understand them. Would you say I had knowledge? He was like, no. I said, okay, so there's something more than just holding facts in your head to saying you have knowledge. He was like, well, yeah. And I was like, okay, so knowledge isn't just facts then? And he was like, no, it is just facts. And it was just like, okay. But there's, a body of knowledge is different to actually having knowledge, isn't it? But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, about the epistemically humble thing about the whole lack belief. You'll get people who will argue that they hold to the lack of belief definition because they want to be humble. They don't want to say they know something that they don't, or believe something that they have no knowledge of. But then turn around when you say, well, there's more than one definition of atheism, and get all uptight and argue for why there's only one definition.
Yeah. As Kimo says, I've consistently found that theists understand the terms atheist and agnostic better than most online atheists. I'd agree with you, but the online atheists that you're talking about there will turn around and say that's just because theists want to separate us, or they're pushing a misunderstanding of atheism. You should let atheists, you get all those arguments. And again, the hanging of skepticism. So, yeah. I thought you guys rejected the agnostic atheist label. I think it's ridiculous. I understand why people use it though. I don't use it. I was just explaining why when someone uses agnostic atheist, what they're generally saying, I don't know if gods exist or not, but I lack belief in gods existing. What they're actually saying there is I don't know twice, because knowledge is a subset of belief. So if you lack a belief in something, you're already saying that you lack knowledge in it. So technically, the lack of belief atheist and agnostic they're basically saying it twice. It's superfluous to say it. And technically, you could even say when they're saying agnostic atheist, they're actually saying they don't know if they're an atheist or not. Like, depending on how you join the words. But that's a very uncharitable reading of what, them using agnostic atheist there. Command Cyborg says, some agnostic atheists say they don't believe there's any gods, but they don't know, or it's impossible to know. Yeah, so that's basically what I was saying. In fact, Command Cyborg, I did an article on this because well, actually, I was in a conversation with a friend, and he asked all of people on his friends list what they meant by agnostic atheist, and they all had different understandings of what it meant to be an agnostic atheist, and it sort of highlighted my point that even self-described agnostic atheists are not clear within themselves about what exactly they meant by agnostic atheist. Um, so and especially when you use how these terms are used more within philosophy, rather than online conversations, it gets even more muddled, which again is why I don't think the label is a particularly good one. However, I do tend to understand what people use by it and what they're trying to convey. I just wish they would accept what I'm saying about knowledge being a subset of belief. But yes. Casey of Jobless Engineer fame once insisted that belief is a subset of knowledge. Interesting way around. It's probably just a misunderstanding it. You have a somewhat unique view of knowledge, but that will probably be needed to be explored on another stream. Yeah, if you want to have a conversation about that in future, Honestly Atheist, we tend to stream about 9 p.m. GMT, that's 4 p.m. Eastern, though we could always go a little bit later if that works for you. Contact me on Twitter and I'll add Dave to it, and we can have a chat about things in the future if you want. I'm well up for that. Lone Wolf, I wish I understood any of these terms or ideas. I just hang out here hoping some of the smarts rub off on me. Don't be silly. I think you understand a hell of a lot of this stuff. Probably way more than I do, and you just sit here laughing at me going, oh, you got that wrong. You got that wrong. That's all Dave does.
Well, I don't know what I'm talking about either.
But you make it seem like you do, so there you go.
That's only because of the printouts of books behind me. You know, the cardboard boxes with a piece of paper wrapped around them.
Oh, hey Jeff, how have you doing? What have you missed? Pretty much everything. We're wrapping up for the night. So sorry, dude. Kimo says, I'd view askew someone who claimed knowledge of a thing without believing that thing. Yeah, that is it. I think sometimes the knowledge and information does get conflated. It's why I did an article on that as well. Like when you know something, sometimes it's what you're saying is I hold the information of this, but you might not have knowledge in the sense of there's I could tell you right now the square root of 196 is 14. Right, you could put that into your calculator and you could go, yeah, that answer's right. And you'd have that information there. But if you didn't understand how square roots worked or anything like that, you wouldn't have knowledge of that thing, but you would know that that answer's right because you verified it with a calculator. So you could have knowledge that the answer was correct. You've justified that, but you wouldn't have knowledge of how it worked. That makes sense. So you'd know the information, Right, cool. I think that puts us in good stead to finish. Though we've covered even more than we were going to. We've gone into knowledge and all sorts, which is good because I mean it was what we were covering in a roundabout way anyway. But we've gone round the houses and discussed a number of great things tonight. Honestly, Atheist, yeah, that's fine. If you'd rather have it on Discord, that is fine. But like I was saying earlier, I struggle to find time outside of doing the streams to do this sort of thing. Although you're more than welcome on our Discord anytime if you're not there already. There should be a link on YouTube, and if not, I'll drop you one later. Next stream will be about Short Circuit and Johnny Five. That's very close, actually. We're planning on doing the metaphysics of horror characters. It's basically the same, right? So yeah, we're going to be doing vampires to start with, and the different types of vampire. Basically, just a bit of a fun stream. Something that you don't necessarily have to think too much about, because my brain power can only handle one stream where I put any effort in a week. But yeah, hopefully you guys will all enjoy that, and hopefully we'll see you on Thursday. But before we go, I would like to say that I think every single one of you should check out the what was it called, Severance stream. We did a stream recently about severance, or the philosophy behind severance, and also check out all of the morality stuff that we've done recently. I've recently released a video on moral realism. But thank you everybody who's tuned in tonight and the replay. You've been watching the SciPhi Show. I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.